Hi, I'm Stefan, the BMW DIY guy, and I want to show you how you can easily change the brakes on your BMW E46 3 Series. Alright y'all, let's talk about this job a little bit before we get started. So first of all, everything you need is going to be listed in the video description below. I always make sure to do that, so part numbers, links, torque values, tools, everything you need is listed there. In addition, please make sure to click subscribe and the little alarm bell. It makes a huge difference to my channel. Now, obviously brakes are super important. This car definitely needs a full brake refresh. So what we're going to be doing today is the full job. Brake pads, brake rotors, and a full brake fluid flush. And I'm going to show you how to do all of that. Now, brake jobs can be very expensive, and a big chunk of it really is labor. So if this is something that you can do yourself, you're going to save yourself a tremendous amount of money. Now, before we get the car off the ground, make sure you've got a 17mm socket to loosen up all the lug nuts, and I'm going to do all four lug nuts, or all four wheels and the lug nuts before the car leaves the ground. That way you can actually loosen them up. Now, also in addition to that, I'm going to be using my quick jacks to get the car up off the ground. But you can also do this with a jack stand and jack if that's what you have. Now, a couple of things, and I'm always going to say this. If you are using a jack and jack stand, make sure you're on a level, secure surface, but also always use a jack stand. Do not trust your life on a 50-cent part in your jack, okay? Please don't do it. So the first thing we want to do is loosen up all your lug nuts all the way around, which is, like I said, it's going to be a thin-walled 17mm socket. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to have the car up in the air, and I'm going to show you all of the next steps. All right, so as you can tell, the wheel is off, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how to do the driver's front, which is what this is, and then I'm going to show the passenger rear. The process for the other two are going to be exactly the same, but I want to show these because your front and one front and one rear also have your brake wear cable as well. So I'll figure I'll show those and how you change your brake wear cable and the rest. But here you are looking at your brake caliper. So you've got your rotor, which we're going to replace. We've got the caliper. Now, these rotors are not in all that bad of a shape. You don't automatically have to do these, but this car's got about 70,000 miles on them. I'm sure that this is the original rotor, so might as well just do it while I'm here. And you get good parts, and they're really not all that expensive. So there's a couple of things here that are going to be a little bit hard to see. So first of all, the center part of your caliper, which is what holds your brake pads on, are held by two bolts through the back. And there are these kind of rubber sleeves with caps. Now, yours may not still have the caps. Depending on the maintenance of your car, it may or may not still have the caps. But these do. So you pull the caps out, and they're 7mm Allens. So I'll get the second cap out here, just like that. So you kind of feel the rubber boot around them. Here's what these caps look like. Okay? And I actually like these caps. If I find them missing or I know they're missing, I will order the replacement parts. So you pull those out, and you've got two 7mm, these very long-necked bolts that go through and hold the center part of your caliper in place. But there's a couple of things you're going to want to do first. So I've already partially cleaned the caliper. I got a can of brake cleaner and sprayed it down. I've got a little catch bin, which you can probably see a little bit underneath, full of paper towels. So all of the gross coming out of there doesn't end up on the ground or washing away or all over my garage floor. Okay, it makes it a little bit cleaner to deal with, but as you can tell, I mean, you're going to end up a little bit dirty. You can also wear shop gloves, which I always forget. Now, you'll also have your rattle clip right here as well. Now, your rattle clip is an interesting little thing because it will be all crusty and kind of stuck here in place, and it's not going to want to move. But before you do anything, go ahead and use a little bit of brake cleaner. Spray this down pretty well. You're going to get a lot of gross that comes out of here. It evaporates quickly. So go ahead and clean off your brake caliper a little bit, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to take the rattle clip out. We'll take these these 7mm Allen bolts out of the back, and then the center part's going to be free. Okay, so I've cleaned to do this because you're also going to torque this back down. So you can see where it fits in right there. Okay, so then just get your wrench in place. These may be a little stiff, they may not. As you can tell, that one broke free really easily. And then I'm just going to find this other one by feel. I can even take my socket off, get it fit in there. And it's really hard to show with the camera around. I know it's around the back and you don't see it really clearly, but you can tell you've got the right things when those caps come out, or if you don't have the caps, it's got these rubber boots around those bolts, right? So I've got my socket in place, and then it just breaks free, okay? So those are out. Now, the other thing you're gonna wanna do is take this rattle clip off. Now, these rattle clips, there's probably a dozen different ways of getting these off, okay? But they're always kind of crusty, they always kind of get stuck in place. You always kind of have to pry on them a little bit, just like that. So what I did was I went and pried with a flat screwdriver kind of up at this front edge, and then it will work its way free. And I'll show you how to put this back on. Now, the fronts are gonna have new rattle clips when we're done. So that'll be great. Okay, so go ahead and take both of these 7mm bolts out, and then this whole center section is gonna come out with your brake pads in it as well. We're also gonna take the bracket off because we're gonna be taking the rotor off next, and I'll show that to you. You've got two big 16mm bolts here on the back, but let's get this off first, and then I'll show you what this looks like. All right, so here's what these long pins look like. Now, one quick tip, very frequently, because once they get free and they're just free spinning, they'll kind of stay in place because that rubber boot that sits around them. What I frequently will do is apply a little bit of side pressure and pull, and my Allen socket will cause it to pull out of the boot itself. So now it's out, and this is actually free. So when you look at this, this will begin to work its way free. Now keep in mind, it's going to be on here fairly tight because of the way the brake shoes are sitting up against the rotor. So if you have to, you can apply a little bit of pressure. So you can see you get that lead edge out. And these are pretty crusty. I suspect these are original brake shoes on here. So just be patient and just work at it. And this will begin to pry itself free. And you can tell it's pretty crusty. So this is where your brake cleaner will pay off as well. So just keep working at this. It'll slowly work its way off, like you can see. Okay, so there it is. There, it's starting to pivot. Okay, a little bit more, a little bit more. There we go. All right, just like that. Now, let's go ahead and out. Left one brake shoe, one brake pad behind, that's fine. We'll get that off in just a second. Okay, but as you can see, this is off. Now, the other thing that we don't want this to do is really pull on that connection back there for your brake wear sensor. So I just yarded that off. We're gonna replace this so it's okay if it breaks. So go ahead and just pull that away from the brake pad itself. You can hang your brake caliper if you're careful, because you don't want to torque on your brake line itself. It can hang itself, or you can use like a hanger and hook in there and let it hold there a little bit. But so now this is off. So let me rearrange a little bit. We have two 16mm bolts that hold this frame in place that we need to get off next. All right, so to get your actual caliper frame off, there's two 16mm bolts. You're very likely going to need a breaker bar on. So let me show you to make sure you realize exactly the ones we're looking at. It's pretty obvious, but let's just make sure. So here's the first one right here, and then the second one is right down here. There really are only two like it. So go ahead and use a 16mm socket. I have to use a long breaker bar. It's like a 24-inch breaker bar to help break those bolts free, because they've been in there probably since OEM and they're pretty crusty. So your typical short-handled wrench isn't going to be strong enough. But once you pull those two out, this whole frame comes off. You're also going to get some more brake dust and some more growth. So just be prepared for that with a little, and be able to catch all the garbage down below. Okay, so go ahead and get that frame off, and then we'll take the rotor off. Okay, so now that that frame is off, and really once you break it free, it comes off with really not much of a problem. You've got a 6mm Allen bolt right here, and it's very short. So what I'll usually do is I can just kind of half hold it and break it free, because the torque on that isn't very high. And I'll have the torque values of when you put it back on, but breaking it free isn't all that hard. And it's pretty amazing that, you know, this little bolt, as you can see, is one of the primary things holding your rotor on, right? Now, granted, when your wheel lugs go through, your wheel lugs are too, but it's pretty crazy. So now your rotor's free. Now, one thing, if it's stuck, and I don't know if this is going to be stuck or not. Yep, it's stuck pretty good. Okay, so here's where what I would recommend you'd have is, if you have a rubber mallet, you can just work your way around, because it's just kind of adhered in place from dirt and grime at this point. So you can use a rubber mallet just to bang this free, and then it'll come off. If you don't have a rubber mallet, which sometimes I haven't had before, I've taken a hammer and taken the wooden handle part to hit it with the handle. Now, This doesn't matter because, again, we're replacing it, so you could hit it with a hammer if you really want to. I usually would use the wooden hammer because it's not as hard on my tool or hard on me or hard on my ears. But use a rubber mallet or the handle of a hammer to just get this to start to break free. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to do it with my hand. Okay, so go ahead and get this off, and then I'll show you what it looks like with it off, and we'll put the new one on. All right, as you can see, it's off. Now, if you wonder which rotor goes to front or rear, just match them up, because the hub center part of your rotor should be identical. The rears kind of have this like little 3-stage lip effect, where the fronts have these straight barrels that come out and then kind of a faceted edge. So you can tell which ones go in front and rear. And these are straight vaned, these particular rotors, so you don't have to worry about which direction the vanes go or anything else like that. So all you have to do is just line it up. You just line it up with that little T6 hole, just like that. And then what you'll do is you'll just take your bolt and screw it back into place. Okay? And this is 16 Newton meters, which is really low. So if you just snug this up with your hand, it's going to be pretty darn close, right? It'll self-center itself because the way this bolt is kind of bezeled when it goes in. Now, there you go. And it's on pretty securely. I'm just going to give it a little bit more. That's good, and I'm going to check it with my torque wrench here once I get to that stage. But 16 Newton meters is really, really low. So you just snug it with your hand and it's going to be good. Okay, so now you're just going to reverse the same process of what you did before. So you're going to take your bracket, right? So here's that inner bracket that we took off with the big 16 millimeters on them, right? It's going to go in this orientation like this, okay? But there's one more thing we've got to do. Well, there's actually two, but we're going to replace our brake wear sensor, which is this guy right here. So I'll show you where it goes back to the box and plugs in. It's off camera right at the moment. But the other thing we're very likely going to need to do is we're going to have to depress the piston back a little bit on the caliper itself. Now, chances are we're probably going to, if your brakes are really worn, you're definitely going to have to, because the piston is going to be pushed out much further than the width of the new thick brakes, so you won't be able to squeeze it onto your rotor. You'll have to press it back a little bit. Now, there's a lot of different ways of doing this. You can get a specific tool. There's a ratcheting tool with two plates that go in between the brake pads, and then you ratchet it and it presses outward and presses all of that back into place. I actually don't have one. What I will very frequently will do, because again, I don't care about these brake pads because the brake pads are gone, I'll frequently take a large pair of pliers and will put one side on the brake pad and the other against the frame of the caliper itself and just squeeze, and it will press that piston back in. So go ahead and do that. Press your piston back in a little bit, and then we're going to talk about replacing your brake wear sensor next. Okay, so let's go ahead and replace our brake wear sensor. You should have two. One's shorter, one's longer. The one in the front is usually the shorter one. And when you pull this off, you can just match it because they're going to be identical. So you can see where the sensor here plugs into the brake pad itself, which I'll show here with the new one in a minute. But you'll see as it attaches to a whole series of little clips right here, the rubber part fits into this little metal grommet right here. So you just take it and push that out. Now, the shadows are going to make it a little bit hard to see right at the moment, but it comes over the top right here where you can see my hand back here in the back. It comes back to this box. You open these little clips, and then the box opens, and you'll see that it's usually this black one on this side. And again, there's this rubber grommet that kind of pulls out of the box. Lots of crusty stuff in here. And then you're going to turn that lower section, turn it and pull it out and replace it with a new one. So take the new one, fit it right back into the same grommets. Same grommets on this side right here, feeds around, comes around to this side, and feed it all the way back down. And basically just duplicate it back in this exact same spot as the other, and then we'll look to plug this into the new brake pad, which I'll show you here in just a second. All right, so as you can tell by the nice clean green cable, the new brake sensor's on. Now, one thing you want to look at here really quickly, when you look at your brake sensor, and it's going to be the same for the front and rear, one side of it is flat, and one side of it has a bump. So when I talk about the bump being to the inside, so facing inward, that's what I mean, the little bump here on one side of the brake sensor. But before we do that, we want to reinstall the bracket. So the bracket is going to go back in the same orientation that it came off. So you just slide it back into place like this, and you're going to take your two 16mm bolts and put them back through the back. So go ahead and just snug them down by hand for now. They are going to be 110 Newton meters. So you can snug it down by hand, and then you can use a torque wrench to put them to 110 before you put the rest of the caliper on. So go ahead and get this bracket back on, torque it down to 110. Okay, so the bracket is in place. I want to show you, you're going to have two brake pads. Now you should have been able to see when you took them off. But one of your brake pads has this bracket on the back. This bracket is what's going to go inside the caliper piston itself. So when this turns over and is inside the caliper, this is going to press into the piston and hold this in place. But the other thing is that it's got this notch right here on the top, which is where your brake wear sensor is going to go. Now remember that the bump should be to the inside, to the pad side, okay? So make sure that that is the case. Now the other thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to feed your brake wear sensor through the top of your caliper right there, right? Because it's going to go into the brake pad itself, okay? So feed it in through the hole. Now the other thing that I've done here really quickly before I forget is I've put a little bit of brake lubricant all along these top edges and a little bit where the piston's going to touch, just to cut down on any chance of squeaking. Okay, so slide your brake caliper back in place, put your brake sensor with the bump to the inside, and then fit your other brake pad just to the other side where it's just going to float. Your other brake pad's just going to float again. The pad to the inside is going to float here on the inside, and then feed it back into place where where it sits on the frame. Okay, so go ahead and get all that done, and then we're going to bolt it back together. Okay, so as you can see, the centerpiece is back in place, but it's just fit into place now. Those big bolts are not back and through. Now, a couple of things that you want to keep in mind: your brake wear sensor, make sure it's in all the clips. Also, you've got this little rubber protective cap that goes over the top of your brake bleeder, which we're going to be dealing with here in a little bit once we bleed our brakes, once we're done with all of this. And then the other tip and trick is that, again, if you can't get this to fit, if the new pads are just too close, that means that piston needs to get pushed further back in, so it just fits all right back in, it fits back and on. Okay, so once this is in place, you can take your long bolts again, feed them in through these rubber kind of grommets, and what I usually do, we'll kind of wiggle them a little bit, get them to sit in. Okay, and then just kind of wiggle them in place, and you can feel when they start to bite and get in place. Okay, so again, get both of those, and you'll want to torque these down as well. I'll have the torque values in just a second, but go ahead and get both of these and snug them down by hand. These are those T7s, so go ahead and get those back in place and secure that, and then we're going to put the new rattle clip on as well. Okay, so both of those are in place, and what you're going to need is 30 Newton meters. So go ahead and just use a torque wrench that is set up. I finally invested in, I actually have two of these digital wrenches now. They're really nice. There's no guesswork. How many turns of the dial, how many, silly things like that, to make this work, right? So just make sure that this is set right, just like that, not hard. And then we'll get the other one here at the bottom as well, just like that, just like that, and it beeps and vibrates. It's really kind of nice. So now when you think about it, everything is pretty much set. We've got the bolt holding the rotor on, torqued down. We've got the 16 millimeters torqued down. We've got those big 7 millimeter Allen bolts torqued down, and then you've got your rattle clip. Now, so the rattle clip, basically what you want to do, it has these little wings on either end. You basically want to line it up and press it until those feet go into place, just like that. And then go ahead and pull on it a little bit, make sure it's hooked. I've had, this helps keep your brake pad from rattling around. I had a rattle clip loose once, and when I took the car for a test drive, immediately started making noise and was all kinds of problems. And I came back and I had a loose rattle clip. So I'm always extra careful with these now when I check them, okay? So, all right, so as far as replacing your rotor and your brake pads are all done here on the front. You do the exact same on the other side, so go ahead and transition over and do that now. Except, of course, you won't have the brake wear sensor, of course, but make sure that this is all tied up and ready to go. Let's go ahead and transition to the passenger side rear, and I'll show you how to do that. It's basically the exact same process with a brake wear sensor. It's just in a different location, like I said, and it's a little bit of a longer cable. So let's go back and do that next. All right, y'all, so here we are at the back corner. So this would be the passenger side corner. And I'm going to move through this one a little bit more quickly because it's going to be the exact same process with the exception of the brake wear sensor, which goes way back over there, which I'll show you in just a second. So I'm forgiving the afternoon sun here. It's kind of made the work kind of shadowy here in the wheel well, even though it is very bright and sunny outside. So you're going to go through the exact same thing. Take a screwdriver or similar or a pry tool, go ahead and pop your rattle clip out. That'll come out. Pull the caps out of the ends of your two little rubber grommets right here. This one is fighting me coming out. There you go. Now, as a reminder, make sure that you put the other two back. And as you go all the way around, if you still have these, make sure to put them back. So go ahead and pull those out. So then, you take the rattle clip, you pull your 7mm Allens out. Those will come out. Those big long bolts will come out. Your center will come out, and then you will take the 16mm here on the back in the exact same places to get this clip off, because this is essentially identical to the fronts. It's just smaller, just a little bit smaller. So the process is going to be exactly the same. So I'm going to summarize the takeoff like I just did, do all that, and then go ahead and pull your brake wear sensor here. And again, that plugs into the pad that goes to the piston, just like it did in the front. Okay, so go ahead and pull all that, and then we'll talk about, once this is all off, we'll take the rotor off. I'll show you that, and then we'll talk about getting the brake wear sensor off, and it goes all the way down through the arm right there, through the actually control arm right there, down through the hole, and tucks back to a similar box back over in the corner over there. But go ahead and get caught up, get all of this off, get the bracket off, and then we'll take the rotor off next. Okay, so you can see that the center caliper is off and the bracket is off. Same process that we've described. I also tend to go through a lot of brake cleaner in this process. If I'm not replacing the calipers, which obviously could be new or they're an upgrade or something similar, I try to get these as clean as I can. You can also use a steel brush on some of this to get some of the really crusty stuff off. But as you can see, that's all off and good to go. So then you're going to use your 6mm Allen. Go ahead and take this off. Take your rotor off. Again, use the rubber mallet if you have to. Also, keep in mind, release your parking brake, because your parking brake will hold one of these rotors in place. I've had that happen where I'm like, why won't it come off? Well, that's because I had the parking brake on. So make sure to undo your parking brake. Okay, so I'm going to take this off next. We'll pull that out. We'll put the new one right back in its place, bolt it into place, torque it down. We'll put the frame back in place with 110 Newton meters to it torque down. And then we can walk through the rest of the process. Now, don't forget to depress your piston back on your caliper here so you've got enough room for the new brake pads. And then we'll talk about feeding the whole new line for the brake wear sensor. And it goes over these little clips down through here, down through some clips here on the back, a clip here. It goes down through the frame and the hole. It has some clips underneath. It goes through some clips over here and goes back into the boxes all the way back over there, which is going to be a little bit hard to see, honestly, with my quick jack in the way. But you can see it if you stick your head under there. So go ahead and take your rotor off, put the new one on, put the caliper frame back on and torque it down, and we'll walk through the rest. All right, so here we are inside the wheel well. You can see the rotors on, and yeah, obviously these are just flat steel rotors, cross-drilled and vented and all that. There's a million opinions about that, and I've put all kinds of different kinds on, and for this particular car, they don't need anything that fancy. So, all right, so as you can see, your brake wear sensor goes through a whole series of clips, down through the hole in frame here, underneath through a series of clips. Now, this is going to be kind of hard to see. I'm going to do my best. It's also kind of crusty back here, too, but you can see kind of where that white is, all the way back there. Right there, you've got another one of those boxes like we did on the front, which is why I did the front first. You can also see it fits into more clips here. So you're gonna have to get underneath, hit all of those clips, open the box, pull the little locking tab on the end of the clip right there, pull it, and it'll come out. And then you can take the new one and run it all up, all the way through, and replace it all the way up here with the new one. Okay, and this one is in perfect shape. But honestly, these are such cheap parts that I replace them 100% of the time whenever I do my brakes, just in case. So if yours is fine, and you're maybe like, this is more trouble than it's worth, but I really feel like it's worth it, okay? So run that all the way through, down through the frame, all the way up to the box, pull it, run the new one back in the same order back through these clips, and get it ready to go. We'll put the center on with the new brake pads, and then we'll bleed the brakes. All right, y'all, so I'm dealing with some crazy lighting right now, so forgive that. But as you can see, we're most of the way back together. So just like I said a moment ago, we've run the whole brake sensor cable, and you know, that is really kind of a hassle. I think out of all of it, trying to get back into that back corner where the box is, you really have to kind of get underneath the car. I had my creeper and I stuck my in the way. But was able to get that plugged in and plugged in firmly, secure it all the way in so it clips, put it into the box, close the box, run the cable all the way up and put all the clips that hold it back in place all the way up to here. Now, you'll use the little rubber guard over the top of the bleed valve right here in a second, but I'm not going to do that right at the moment. Make sure to plug it into the brake pad that's on the inside, the one that's on the piston with the bump facing inward, just as a reminder. Now, I don't have the 7mm Allens back in, so this is still loose, and I don't have the rattle clip on yet. So those are the next things to do. I'll put in both 7s, I'll torque the 7s down to 30, and I'll put the rattle clip in, and this side will be done. Now, if you haven't done the other side already, then you'll want to go do and repeat the exact same thing, minus the brake sensor, over on the other side. Now, I'm going to stay here on this side, so once I get this all secure, because what we're going to do next is bleed the brake system. Now, this car is definitely needs it, and so I'll show you that process. We'll pop the hood. I've got a little pressure bottle that we put up on the brake reservoir itself with fresh fluid. We pressurize it, and then we bleed at the farthest point from the reservoir, from your master brake cylinder, which is going to be passenger side rear. So as a reminder, so as we bleed, and I'll explain it more, but we'll do passenger side rear, driver side rear, passenger side front, driver side front. And I'll walk you through that in just a second. But get all this finished up, get this all bolted down and torqued down the way it's supposed to be, and then we're gonna bleed this, put our wheels back on, and we're almost done. All right, here we are at the front of the car. So the couple of things I've done in advance, just so to help move this along. Make sure I clean all around the top of your brake fluid reservoir. Make sure you're not introducing any debris or anything or any problems there. So clean it thoroughly. Also, when you pull the cap out, I always make sure to put it on a clean paper towel, but I prefer microfiber so I don't get lint. Okay, so it's out of the way and it's dry. Now remember, moisture is the enemy of brake fluid. So you always want to use a brand new container of brake fluid that you just opened. Don't use any that's been sitting around open because it will have collected moisture and you're going to waste all of your time. Now, this brake fluid that I got is the correct brake fluid for this. Please refer to your car manual to ensure that you have the right kind. Okay, I'm running synthetic .4. Double check your car and what works. But in many cases, .3 or .4 will work, sometimes even .5. Make sure to check and you put the right stuff in. Now this is perfectly clear. I've filled about 3/4 of my pressure bottle, even though the outside looks pretty gross, so ignore that. I've pressurized it, so I've connected this. I poured in the brake fluid, I connected my pressure bottle, and then I went ahead and pressurized it. So what this does is this applies pressure through the whole system. So it's going to be pushing the brake fluid out of the reservoir through the system when we go and open the valve at the far end. Now, if you look in the reservoir, this was pretty brown. It's pretty gross. So what we're going to do is go now to the other end, now passenger side rear, and we're going to use a 9mm wrench. We're going to open that little valve with a bleeder bottle on it, and we'll watch it bleed out of that hose, and we'll let it bleed until two things. One, it runs clear, and two, no bubbles. Now, it could run a really long time depending on what's going on. I've had these go through fairly quickly. You know, I'm just about done, and suddenly you'll see a couple more bubbles in the hose. So run it until it's clear, in this case clear, and you have no bubbles, all right? So let's go and take a look at what that looks like at the other end, and then we're gonna repeat that all the way around. I won't do every single corner. I'll show you one, but we'll do passenger side rear, driver side rear, passenger side front, driver side front. Do all four. Always make sure to check the pressure in your bottle, that it's not getting low. Always make sure that your reservoir is not running low, because if it runs low, it'll start pushing in air, which is bad. Okay, so let's go back to that back corner and take a look at what it looks like to bleed it out of that bottle. Okay, so here we are at the passenger side rear. So I've got my bleeder bottle here connected, and it is connected here to the bleeder valve right here on top. So you just press the hose into place, and then that's a 9mm basically nut on this. So basically just turn it. Could be a little stiff. There we go. Yeah, it looks like tea coming out of there. So you just turn it enough to loosen it. You don't crank on it a bunch, right? So just do enough for it to come out. Sometimes I'll use a light. So if I can get into the point where I'm having a hard time seeing it, I'll put a flashlight on the other side of the hose. But yeah, it's definitely coming out of there, and it is brown, brown, brown. So you know that we're looking for clear. We're not getting any bubbles, but we will at some point. So go ahead, and this is just patience. This is just going to be a matter of sitting here and going ahead and letting this bleed through. Know it's getting pressure from the other end, and you run it until it runs clear. This corner is going to take the longest because it's the furthest from the reservoir. So just let it run. Once it runs clear and you have no bubbles coming out, take your wrench and close this. Put your brake sensor cable back into the little elbow of this cover. Put the cover back into place and go ahead and do all the rest. See, there we go. There's some bubbles right there. Probably not going to be able to see them on the camera, but definitely seeing some bubbles come through now. And it's getting lighter and lighter as it goes here, which is good. It's not the tea brown that it initially was. Okay, but just patience and let this keep going. Okay, so I've got my light. So as you can see, it's pretty much run clear now. There's a few bubbles left in the hose, but they weren't running actually through the hose. So they were just lingering bubbles. So it's pretty much just all run clear, and you can see what it looked like when it started, and that's pretty gross. So I filled up the entire bottle. So I'm going to take this and empty it before I move on to the next one, which will be the driver's side rear. And these will get a little bit faster as we go, but this is a matter of just sitting here, being patient and waiting until it runs clear. So tighten the bleeder valve back down again. It's just snug. And then, you know, take your hose off, put your brake sensor wire back in place and put the cap back on. Make sure that your rattle clip is in place and everything else is done. Everything is torqued down and everything's set as far as the physical hardware. So now all we have to do is go around and bleed all of the other three. Keep an eye on your bleeder bottle up under the hood to make sure it doesn't run low on brake fluid, and every now and then repressurize it a little bit to keep this process flowing. So go ahead and do the other three, and then we're going to wrap up and finish up. All right, so let's give it a walk around. So all the bleeding is done. This far corner takes the longest. I usually use this opportunity to walk around and clean up a little bit, start to put my tools away, come back and check, keep an eye on the bleeder bottle. But once it's done and you move around and you do the driver's side, it takes a little bit less. You do the passenger side front, it takes a little bit less, and so on until you're almost done. Okay, so let's just finish up here and wrap up. Obviously, I haven't put the wheels back on yet. The bleeder bottle still has some pressure in it, so you always make sure to release it at the bottle, not here at the reservoir. So I haven't done that yet, but you know, open this up and release the pressure here. Make sure that your reservoir is topped off and at the correct maximum level. Okay. Now, I always come back and check it in a couple of days just to make sure that something hasn't worked its way out and it's at the right levels. Okay, so everything looks good. This is a great opportunity to do a quick last check. Have you torqued everything down? Are the plastic caps on those 7mm Allens back on if you have them? And if not, this is a great opportunity to go and get them. If you check the description, I'll throw a part number for those caps in because they're often missing. So make sure to double check all the way around. I'm going to put the wheels back on. Now let's talk about that really quick, and I'll do one last walkthrough when we're done, but as you can see, we're pretty much all done all the way around. Now, with your wheels, you always, hey, there's my lawnmower. So you always do a star pattern, right? So when you put them on, you know, you can just put the bolts in, just hand snug. But when you actually torque them down, and it's 90 foot-pounds of torque for an E46 330, you always do a star pattern. You know, start somewhere, so like start at the top, go diagonally across, diagonally across, diagonally across, diagonally across, all the way around until they're 90. Now, you snug them up when the car's up in the air, like it is right now. When you put it on the ground, that's when you actually torque it down. So you can see my wheels are still off, but pretty much all done. Let me just get my wheels on, put the car back on the ground, and we're good to go. All right, y'all, so all done. Make sure that you torqued your wheels down to 90 foot-pounds which is appropriate for an E46. So as you can tell, this really isn't that hard. It's going to take you a little while, especially if you've never done it before, but it takes a few simple tools, and everything that you need is listed in the description below. It really doesn't take anything overly complex, and it's really not all that hard. It's just kind of detail oriented, and you have to walk through it step by step. And again, if you haven't done it before, it might be a little bit intimidating, but it's really not that hard. So I encourage you to try this. always be safe. Now, really quickly about bedding your brake pads in. There are a million opinions. Everywhere you look, you will find every opinion on what and when and how to bed in your brake pads. So the first place I would recommend you look is go to your manufacturer of your brake pads, because there are a million different kinds, whether you want OEM, you want R1 Concepts, you want Hawk pads, just you name it. And they all have different recommendations. So I'm not actually going to give you a specific recommendation on how to break in your brake pads, because it depends on which ones you have. So make sure to go check that out. Walk your car through it, so to make sure, whether it's like 3 firm stops, right after it, and then, give it a while to warm up, or whatever it happens to be for your particular brake pads. Okay, so hopefully this inspired you that you can do this work yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please make sure to click subscribe and the little alarm bell, and everything you need is in the video description like it is on all of my videos. I have a ton of awesome projects coming, new car reviews, more DIYs, you name it. I look forward to seeing you on my next video.